talking with our junior youth. We're going through different passages in Scripture and challenging them to say, it might take some work, but every time you open the Bible, you can get something out of it. And then I got to Luke chapter 13 this week. And I had to remember what I said to the youth. You can get something out of it every time. And so it took a lot of wrestling. It took a lot of reading and rereading. And as is the case, whenever you wrestle with Scripture, then you get too much out of it. So let me read the passage. It's Luke chapter 13, if anyone wants to look at it further. Luke 13, now there were some present at the time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Jesus answered, "Do you think that these people were worse sinners than others because they suffered more? I tell you, no. But unless you change your lives, you're going to perish as well. Or those 18 who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them. Do you think they were more guilty than other people because of how they suffered? No. But unless you turn and change, you too will perish." It might not look like it at first glance, but this is an entire chapter asking questions about justice. It's a chapter about justice. Do bad things happen to people who do worse stuff in the world? Is a really normal human question, right? If someone does something really bad, shouldn't they get what's coming to them? Right? Whether we admit it or not, I think we all have that thought. I remember the very first time as a pastor, I brought students on a missions trip. Young pastor, I had never led a missions trip or brought students internationally, and now we were driving across the border headed to Chicago. We were on the I-94 just outside of Detroit, and we were in a really big traffic jam. I was nervous already, right? I've got a van full of kids that aren't related to me. I've got to get them safely to and from Chicago. They need to have a good experience. And to up the ante, I had foolishly given the host that we were meeting a firm deadline of when we were going to arrive. And as we get out of Detroit, there is a traffic jam forever. It's just, there's no movement. There is construction, there are car accidents, there is no movement, and I keep seeing the clock on the dashboard just staring at me like, oh, okay, I'll call them, we'll be 1 hour late. 2 hours late. I'll call them again. I don't know when we're going to get there. We'll see what happens. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm stressed, and I'm uncomfortable. And the students are great, right? They're not saying any negative comments whatsoever in the van. Just kidding. And as I'm sitting there, I hear this rumbling. And it gets louder and louder and louder. And in my rearview mirror, I see this massive single file line of motorcycles. We are not moving. How are these guys moving? And we start to notice that this massive group of, I don't know if it was a motorcycle club or something, they had their leather jackets on, all with like the insignia. They were flying down the road because they were using the shoulder. So we were trapped, and they were going very fast. It doesn't feel right to me. And so my blood pressure goes down a little bit. It's fine. It'll be okay. And we slowly start to make our way down the road. And as we get, a couple kilometers down the road, what do I see in my windshield? Police sirens. Police sirens specifically blocking the shoulder of the road with their big ticket book out, writing this giant line of motorcycle riders a ticket. And all of you silently cheer inside, right? Right? It was really hard for me as I was, going 10 kilometers down the, just barely going by, to not look out and think, you got what was coming to you. Right? There's something inside of us that really values justice. Whether we admit it or not, I think it's this natural human thing where we look at other people and we say, what they do should be punished, should be corrected, should be, justice should be enacted. But when I look at myself, what do I say? I hope I'll get forgiveness and grace and mercy and compassion. When someone does something wrong that I don't agree with, like those motorcycle riders, I start to make assumptions about their character and who they are. Right? I probably had some really bad thoughts of course it was a motorcycle gang. Right? Of course it was them. And I probably had some really unhelpful and unhealthy assumptions about these people. That doesn't help the situation, and it's all out of this desire for justice. All of our questions seem to come back to that. But then in Luke 13, Jesus says this parable. He says, a man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, and he didn't find any. So he said to the man who took care of this vineyard, for 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit and I haven't found any. Cut it down. It's just wasting soil. Sir, the man replied, leave it alone for 1 more year. I'll dig around it, I'll add fertilizer, I'll water it, and if it bears fruit next year, great. And if it doesn't, then let's talk about cutting it down. A reminder that it might not look like it at first glance, but Luke chapter 13 is all about justice. Here at Avon, we are committed to the Anabaptist lens. And so if you're new to Avon, if you're new to Anabaptism, it is a way of looking at Scripture. Here's how we interpret Scripture. Here's how we view and interpret the world around us. Anabaptism is 500 years old, and it values things like social justice, peace and pacifism, simple living and generosity, taking care of the planet that we've been blessed with. It's a fantastic lens for me to look at Scripture and look at the world around me. And so this week, I decided to look at some of the earliest Anabaptist writings. And I found one from 1527 from Swiss Mennonites. And what they decided is we're going to write 7 confessions, and this is what we're going to agree to as a community. This is how we're going to look at the world. This is how we're going to interact with each other. This is how we're going to value some things and not value other things. It's not a bad thing to not value certain things. It is a way to narrow our focus on what we're going to agree on. And so I was reading it, and here's what I found really interesting. 7 statements. And there is no statement advocating for justice. It's really interesting to me. 7 statements, and there is no section advocating for justice. The one that gets closest is called the sword. And let me read a paraphrase for you. I found it so interesting this week. Here's my paraphrase. The sword is used by the world to punish anyone who does evil. The sword enacts justice. As Anabaptists, should we also use the sword to defend ourselves, to protect the good, and to enact justice? Never. Christ teaches us to be compassionate, merciful, and humble. Instead, we will live different. When someone in our community sins, when they mess up, we won't enact justice. We will remove them from the situation as a way to warn them of their sin and tell them to sin no more. For in Scripture, when the adulterous woman is caught and the world wants to stone her to death because of justice, what does Jesus do? In mercy, in forgiveness, and as a warning, tells her to sin no more. So we should follow in the footsteps of Christ. 500 years ago, early Swiss Anabaptists, they wrestled with this tension that I felt this week of, on one hand, justice, and on the other hand, love, mercy, compassion, grace, forgiveness. They felt this tension. How do those both coexist within us and within our community? How do we fight for justice? How do we make the world a better place? How do we hold people accountable when they do really horrible things? And yet, how do we also show overflowing love and compassion and mercy to all people that we meet? And for these early Anabaptists, they decided, as they saw this tension, as they saw this paradox, let's lean into the side that is loving and forgiving and merciful. But as I was thinking this week, I'm not going to suggest that we need to go back to 1527. I'm not saying that we've gone astray and we just need to go back there. I actually think there's something really profound that happens in our lives when we see a tension between two things and we live in that tension, when we live in the middle of it, right? When we live in the middle of a paradox, meaning that both can be true, I actually think that's where some really profound truths can come into our lives. That's where we can start to do some really profound things. And I think Luke chapter 13, as it offers the tension between justice and mercy and love, gives us a really profound way to sit in that tension. And it's patience. Patience is the key to sitting in the tension between love and justice. Here's why. Okay, let's go back to the text. First, a question is given to Jesus. Jesus, there's some really horrible people who did some horrible things, and they got punished for it. Right? They were punished more severely. They were suffering more because they were bad people, right? Jesus says, no. Everyone needs to change how they're living, or we're all going to perish. Then Jesus says, remember that tower that fell on people. If your logic is right, I mean, didn't they must have been horrible people, right? They suffered so much. Is that true? No. Everyone's got to change. Here's our first challenge from Christ, and here's where patience comes into it. I think Jesus is challenging us to stop having a hierarchy in our lives in how we compare ourselves to other people. Right? We all do it. We all slot ourselves in, right? I'm not as bad as so-and-so, but I'm definitely better than so-and-so. We start to rank ourselves. We start to say, yeah, that's not that bad. Other people do way worse than me. I mean, I'm not Mother Teresa good, but and we fill in the blank. We start to have this hierarchy and we start to rank ourselves. And not only does that make us become in competition with our neighbor, but what does it do to our self-esteem as well, right? I am never good enough. That person is never good enough. Hierarchies aren't helpful. And so I think Jesus is reminding everyone in this parable, we're all in the same boat. Right? If we are all made in the image of God, that means we all have a little piece of God's beauty in us. Everyone. And if we all make mistakes, some more, some less, we're all in the same boat. We need to get rid of that hierarchy so that we stop competing with our neighbor, we start judging our neighbor, we start judging ourselves, and instead we start living together in harmony, in peace, with reconciliation in mind. We got to remove the hierarchy, but here's the challenge, okay? When we get rid of that hierarchy, when we start to see someone that really annoys us and say, we're in the same boat. Now, what do I need to do life with them? I'm going to need a lot of patience, right? I remember I had just become a Christian. And I was working at Canadian Tire, and there was this coworker that I just, oh man, everything was just tension. We disagreed on everything. Going to work was just like, oh, what's it gonna be today? And so remember I said, careful what you pray for. I prayed, said, no, the old me would have got angry. I'm going to try to do it the Christ way. God, can you give me a lot of patience when I go to work? And so what did God do? I went in for my next shift, and my manager came up and said, normally we give you your schedule 1 week ahead, but I'm going on vacation. I'm going to give it to you for 4 months. And every single shift I was with that person. There's my lesson in patience. Great, okay. We're in the same boat. We are both made in the image of God. I'm going to be patient as I work with this person. And that's easier said than done, but I think it starts by getting rid of that hierarchy. When I stop ranking every person I meet as either worse or better than me, and instead I start to see everyone through empathy, then my greatest tool needs to be patience. Second, when we see a systematic evil in the world, right? When we fight for social justice, when we try to make the world a better place by fighting against systematic things that are oppressing people and marginalizing people, what do we need other than patience? And as I thought about that this week, it sounds a little backwards, right? No, we need initiative. We need courage. We need boldness. We need to stand up and be bold and brave and make a difference. And that might be true, but not without patience. There's an advocate named Miriam Kaba, and her goal is to end violence, and she wants to dismantle the really harmful parts of our prison systems. She works with trauma survivors, people who were abused and then sought revenge or vengeance on their abuser and are now in prison, and she's working with them trying to be an advocate. It's a really interesting person to hear speak. And she famously says this: as I think about all of the things that I am doing to try to make the world a better place, I need to remember hope is a discipline. Hope is a discipline. Hope is not optimism. Hope is a regular discipline that is designed to remind us that our current situation is not final, that there is an end in sight. And she doesn't say it in that quote, but what do we need in connection to hope? If you can't see the end, but you know that it's coming, you're going to need a lot of patience. As you fight social justice in the world, you're going to need hope and a lot of patience to keep going. And that's really, when I heard her speak, that's basically what she kept coming back to. I'm going to take one step forward and I'm going to be patient. And I'm going to know that if I keep taking enough steps forward, something good's going to happen. Might not be today, might not be tomorrow, might not be for decades, but something good is here. Miriam Kaba makes me think of this Old Testament book called Habakkuk. Let me give you an overview, okay? The prophet gives a brief description of the situation facing God's people. It says this in chapter 1. Destruction and violence is everywhere. There is strife, conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked keep beating the righteous, and justice is gone. Then he goes on to say, there's actually there's a thing that's going to come and is going to enact justice on all this. It's called the Babylonian Empire, and guess what? They're even more unjust than our current situation. And so the prophet looks to God and says, where are you? This is horrible. There is no justice anywhere, right? That feeling that I got when I saw the motorcycle gang drive past me, like tenfold, right? The world is horrible right now. Where are you, God? And then the prophet sits and waits and listens. And here's God's response in chapter 2. It's boiled down to a really simple descriptive sentence. It says, God's people shall live by faith. Remain true to what I have told you about faithful living. Keep living the Christ way. Good is coming. Live the way I have told you to live, even in the face of injustice, even if injustice keeps piling up. I'm here and good's coming. That screams patience to me again. When we look at all the pain and suffering that's in our world, when we sit in the tension between how do we fight for justice and how do we offer love and mercy and compassion, it's patience. Patience is the tool that we really need. And remember, hope is a discipline. Here's my last point. When God looks at me, at all the mess that's in my life, all the ways that I stumble, all the ways that I'm not producing fruit in the world, all the ways I'm not making a difference and I'm just making it worse. God looks at me and says, let's be patient. I'm going to fertilize it a bit more. I'm going to water it a bit more. Growth is coming. Then Jesus told this parable. A man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, and he didn't find any. So he said to the man, for 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree, and I haven't found any. Cut it down, it's wasting soil. Sir, the man replied, leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it, and I'll fertilize it, and I'll water it, and if it bears fruit next year, amazing, and if it doesn't, then let's talk. See, what really surprised and fascinated me as I read Luke 13 is the start is, you need to change now. And I kind of expected the rest of the chapter to follow in that pattern, right? We all need to change. We all need to grow and transform our lives. And then Jesus fits in this really weird story about a tree and says, it's okay, we've still got some time. It might not look like you're growing. Let's water it some more and let's talk again later. And I think Jesus is sitting in that tension. When a just God who values justice and a God who values love looks at me and could pick justice or could pick love, I think God picks patience. God looks at me and says, we've got some time. See, we wouldn't know this from the text. They I think, would have just had this knowledge because of where they lived. But a fig tree, for 3 years, there's been no fruit. What is going on? Fig trees aren't supposed to grow fruit for the first 3 years. It's not how they're designed. That's not what they're supposed to do. You plant them, you work as hard as you can to take care of them, and for 3 years it looks like this tree is doing nothing. And I kind of wonder if that's a helpful way for me to look at my neighbor. Right? Sometimes when I look at someone and I go, that is a horrible person, that is a person who makes mistakes, I am looking at a tree and saying there is no fruit on that tree. And I'm totally missing out on the fact that I bet you there's a lot of growth inside. Right? If a person was to walk past that vineyard and they would go at a time when the gardener was never there, all they would see is this dead tree in the front lawn. And they would say, what a waste of soil. They would have no idea that there was this gardener coming every single day and fertilizing it and watering it and caring for it and saying, let's be patient, there's some growth coming. And as I look at my own life and as I look at how can I be loving and compassionate to my neighbor, I would much rather assume that there is internal growth in my neighbor's life that maybe I can't see. Maybe there's growth even though they're still making mistakes on the outside than to just assume that they're a dead tree. That ends the conversation, right? There's no growth potential. There's no empathy potential. There's no way to have patience if I immediately assume, yeah, that's a waste. But if I look at someone and I have empathy and I say, maybe there's a spiritual gardener in their life that I can't see, that is fertilizing their life, that is watering their life, and I'm going to have some patience to see if that growth comes in months or years or decades. If I'm going to journey alongside them and also be a gardener, to show compassion and to say, in love and in justice, I'm going to sit in the tension and choose patience. I think that's going to help me better journey along with my neighbors. Maybe if we give them some more time and we choose patience, we'll see fruit grow. Because as much as I don't want to admit it, when I look at my own life, there were a lot of years where there was no fruit growing. And God looked at me and said, no, let's be patient. I'm going to fertilize it. I'm going to water it. I'm going to tend. Growth is coming.